There is a piece of text on every single scroll, every wanted poster, every shop sign, and every background surface in Avatar, The Last Airbender. And every one of those characters, every single brushstroke of writing in that show, was hand calligraphed by a real scholar. Not approximate, not decorative, not invented symbols designed to look vaguely Asian. Real classical Chinese calligraphy written by a Hong Kong-born professor named Dr. Su Leong Li, who earned his doctorate in biochemistry from Purdue University in 1974, retired from science, and then spent the rest of his career running a website dedicated to Chinese calligraphy called Asia Wind, which is where Nickelodeon found him in 2005. They contacted him. They brought him on as the official cultural consultant and calligrapher for all 3 seasons of the show, and he stayed on through The Legend of Korra and later through Avatar Legends, the tabletop role-playing game. He is in the credits of every single episode. His name is small and easy to miss, and almost nobody who loves this show knows it. That is where we are starting tonight. Not with a fight scene. Not with a character moment. With a man and a brush and a discipline that most people watching a Saturday afternoon Nickelodeon cartoon would never, could never, be expected to notice. That is what this is going to be. 2 hours of the things you missed. The things that were always there. The things the show built into itself, not because anyone required it, but because the people making it could not imagine making it any other way. So, settle in, get comfortable, breathe out, let the room go quiet around you, because for the next 2 hours we are going back to that world, the one with the flying bison and the silver moon and the tea shop at the end of the war. The one that was built with more care than anything has a right to be, and we are going to walk through every room of it, every corridor and chamber and secret passage, and look at the things the lights were never quite bright enough to illuminate. Every single one of these facts is real. Where something is uncertain or debated, I will tell you. But the vast majority of what follows is documented, sourced, confirmed by the creators themselves, or visible on screen to anyone who knows where to look. Now, let us begin. Part 1. The foundation nobody sees. The first thing you need to understand about Avatar, The Last Airbender, is that it was born from 2 things that had no obvious reason to collide. Brian Konietzko was sitting at his desk in 2001, sketching. He had an old drawing of a middle-aged, balding man, someone he had been developing for an unrelated project, and he began reimagining that character. The bald head stayed, but the man became a boy, and the boy was herding sky bison. Konietzko drew this character drifting across the sky on the back of a massive, 6-legged, arrow-marked animal and showed the sketch to his colleague Michael DiMartino, who at that exact moment was watching a documentary about explorers trapped in the Antarctic. Specifically, DiMartino was watching an account of the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition led by Ernest Shackleton in 1914, the voyage whose ship Endurance was crushed by pack ice, leaving the crew stranded at the bottom of the world for months before their extraordinary rescue. DiMartino was struck by the imagery. Men surrounded by a hostile, frozen landscape, alone, cut off, waiting. He described a scenario to Konietzko about a group of children similarly trapped in the South Pole, threatened by fire people, waiting to be rescued by someone with extraordinary abilities. Konietzko took that idea and combined it with his bald nomadic boy and his sky bison, and in 2 weeks of conversations, the premise of Avatar existed. The creation story of the show is itself a lesson about where great ideas come from. They do not come from planning. They come from 2 people in the same room with different things in their minds, and the willingness to let those things collide and see what grows in the space between them. A bald figure on a sketching pad and a polar documentary playing on a screen. Neither one was Avatar. Together, they were. But here is what matters more than the speed of the inspiration. The speed of the inspiration was not the speed of the work. Konietzko and DiMartino pitched the show to Nickelodeon in 2002. The show premiered on the 21st of February, 2005. That is 3 years of development before a single episode aired. 3 years during which the creators built the world's entire mythology from the ground up, traveled to Asia, studied cultural traditions, assembled a team of consultants, established rules for how every element of the world functioned, and created a story bible detailed enough that every writer on the show could see the entire 3-season arc before production began on the first episode. Most television shows, animated or otherwise, do not work this way. Most shows are developed season by season, renewed 1 year at a time, built on the fly as they go. Avatar was designed as a complete 3-act story before the first frame was drawn for broadcast. The creators knew where it would end. They knew Aang would face Fire Lord Ozai during Sozin's Comet. They knew Zuko's redemption arc. They knew the role Iroh would play. And because they knew all of this, every single detail planted in Season 1, every quiet moment of foreshadowing, every small visual choice, every piece of calligraphy Dr. Lee brushed onto a background scroll, every note Jeremy Zuckerman wove into a score had the full weight of the finished story behind it. That is the hidden fact that contains all the other hidden facts. The show was complete before you ever saw it, which means everything in it was chosen. Nothing was accidental. The things you did not notice were placed there by people who knew exactly what they were doing and trusted that you would feel them even if you could not see them. Dr. Lee's contribution deserves more attention than it typically gets, because it extended far beyond simple translation work. He used different calligraphic scripts for different nations and contexts within the Avatar world. For ancient spiritual texts, for documents that were meant to feel genuinely old, he used archaic Chinese scripts, forms that predate the modern era of the written language, forms associated with oracle bones and early imperial records. For everyday signs and shop fronts and wanted posters, he used styles appropriate to the context. Clerical script, standard script, forms that would feel legible and lived in to anyone who could read them. The Fire Nation's official documents use a more rigid, angular style, consistent with military administration and formal governance. Earth Kingdom scholarship uses a rounder, more ornate approach, something that carries the weight of a long bureaucratic and academic tradition. The air nomad inscriptions, which appear on temple walls in ways that most viewers would never pause to examine, use a flowing, archaic style that feels genuinely old, the calligraphy of a civilization that has been writing in these same stones for centuries. Water Tribe writing is spare, as befits a culture whose relationship with written language is more practical than decorative, and whose environment does not exactly invite elaborate scroll work. He wrote all of it. The Ember Island Player's poster, which translates in full to something close to the famous Earth Kingdom playwright's new work, has collected information about the Avatar from around the globe, from the icebergs of the South Pole to the Earth Kingdom capital. Every word of that, readable by anyone who reads classical Chinese, on a poster in the background of an episode that aired on Nickelodeon in 2008 to an audience that was mostly between 6 and 11 years old. Nobody told them to read it. Nobody translated it on screen. The creators just put it there, because that is what it would say if the world were real, and the world had to be real, and the realness of the world was not something you could compromise on. The map of the Avatar world also contains text. A quote from The Analects of Confucius, slightly rearranged. The same characters as in the original, in a different word order. A philosophical statement embedded in the geography of a fictional planet. If you have ever seen a map of the Avatar world and felt like it had weight, like it described a place that existed in its fullness, rather than just the parts of it the show had time to show you, that is partly why. Someone thought about what would be written at the bottom of that map, and then wrote it correctly. Now consider what this means in practice. Dr. Lee was working across 3 seasons, producing original calligraphy for every piece of visible text in the show. Every store sign in Ba Sing Se, every scroll in the library of Wan Shi Tong, every inscription on every Air Temple wall, every wanted poster in every Fire Nation town. He was being given episode scripts and production designs and producing text appropriate to each specific context, applying his knowledge of different periods and styles of Chinese writing to ensure that the calligraphy of the Fire Nation's military records looked different from the calligraphy of the Air Nomads' spiritual texts. This is not the work of a few weeks. This is an ongoing research and creative practice maintained across the entire production run of the show, and the show never mentions this. There is no episode where a character pauses to appreciate the quality of the calligraphy in the background. No behind-the-scenes featurette, at least not during the original broadcast era, that highlighted Dr. Lee's contribution as a selling point. The calligraphy is simply there, in every frame that contains written text, doing its work in silence, making the world feel older and more real and more complete, making the invisible architecture solid, This is the production philosophy the whole show operates on. The thing you do not see must be just as carefully made as the thing you do. The detail that cannot be perceived must still be correct. The fact that most viewers will never read the calligraphy is not a reason to make the calligraphy approximate. It is not a reason to use placeholder symbols or to reuse the same few characters in different arrangements so the animation budget stays manageable. The calligraphy is real because the world is real, and the world must be real even in the parts of it nobody is looking at. That is the foundation everything else rests on, the invisible architecture, the part of the building that holds the building up. And now that you know it is there, now that you have the shape of this foundation in your mind, the rest of the hidden facts will land differently, because they are all expressions of the same principle. The care that went into the calligraphy is the same care that went into the martial arts, and the music, and the lunar cycle, and the sleeping position of a blind earthbender, and the name of a small lemur eating a peach in the ruins of a temple. Someone cared about all of it. Let us keep going. If you are watching or listening to this right now, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, drop a comment and tell me. Tell me your city, your country, the hour. There is something I genuinely love about knowing the places and the times that these videos reach. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the moment. It costs nothing and it means these long, slow, careful videos keep coming. Now, the next room. Part 2. The Body Speaks. Every fight scene in Avatar, The Last Airbender, is a conversation between two philosophies. This is not a metaphor. It is literally true. And understanding it changes the way every fight in the show looks, and the way every character feels when they move. The story of how this came to be starts with Brian Konietzko enrolling in a kung fu class sometime during the early development of the show. He was taking Northern Shaolin Kung Fu, a style characterized by wide stances, powerful extended arm movements, high kicks, leaping techniques, and aggressive forward momentum. And he was taking it from a man named Sifu Kisu, a martial artist who had spent decades training in multiple Chinese disciplines through the Harmonious Fist Chinese Athletic Association. Kisu had studied Northern Shaolin from Master Kenneth Hui and also had backgrounds in jiu-jitsu, karate, and taekwondo. He was a teacher and a practitioner simultaneously, someone who understood not just how these styles looked, but what they meant, where they came from, and what philosophy each one was designed to express. Konietzko began describing his idea for the show's bending system to Kisu, and Kisu, by all accounts, was immediately enthusiastic. His suggestion was that the show should not invent fictional fighting styles. It should use real ones. It should assign a specific discipline of Chinese martial arts to each nation and each element, matched not just visually but philosophically. Not just so the bending looks good, though it would, but so the bending means something. So that the way a waterbender moves tells you something true about the nature of water. So that the way an earthbender stands tells you something true about the nature of stone. Kisu worked on all 61 episodes of the show. He choreographed every single bending fight scene. He then performed those movements himself, on video, which was sent to the animation studios in South Korea as frame-by-frame reference material. The animators were not inventing movements. They were copying them, translating a real human body performing a real martial art form into the drawn lines of an animated character. The bending in Avatar is real martial arts recorded in California and reproduced in ink in Seoul. That is the pipeline. That is why it moves the way it does. Here is how the assignments work and why each one was chosen. Waterbending is based on Tai Chi, specifically the principles of alignment, body structure, breath, and visualization that define the internal martial arts tradition. Tai Chi is an internal art, meaning its power comes from within, from the cultivation and direction of internal energy rather than from muscle mass or physical aggression. Sifu Kisu described it as being about flow, about accepting the opponent's energy and redirecting it rather than meeting force with force. Its central philosophy is yielding. You do not block a Tai Chi strike. You receive it and redirect it. You do not oppose force. You soften, yield, and lead the force away. This is precisely what waterbending looks like. Katara does not throw herself into a fight. She reads the incoming energy, receives it, turns it back. The circular motions of her arms, the way she draws water toward herself before redirecting it outward, the fluidity of her footwork, these are all Tai Chi forms, practiced in parks across China every morning by millions of people. When Katara defeats a much larger, much stronger opponent by turning his own force back on him, she is doing what Tai Chi is designed to do. She is not getting stronger than her opponent. She is becoming more fluid than his force. Earthbending is based on Hung Gar Kung Fu, which translates roughly to immense fist, and traces its origins to survivors of the destruction of the Shaolin Temple during the Qing dynasty. Hung Gar is a southern Chinese martial art defined by extremely rooted, wide stances, powerful hand techniques, low center of gravity, and an absolute refusal to yield ground. A Hung Gar practitioner does not step back. A Hung Gar practitioner does not flow around a strike. A Hung Gar practitioner receives the strike and absorbs it through the earth they are standing on, like a mountain receiving wind. The stance is the weapon and the defense simultaneously. Being unmovable is how you win. This is why earthbenders in the show stamp their feet, why they widen their stances before throwing stone, why every major earthbending technique begins with a connection to the ground. Earth does not yield. Hung Gar does not yield. The philosophy of the element is embedded in the movements of the style in a way that makes the bending feel like a natural expression of the element, rather than a set of arbitrarily assigned moves. Firebending is based on Northern Shaolin, which is Kisu's own primary style. Northern Shaolin uses wide stances, quick advances and retreats, kicking and leaping techniques, whirling circular blocks, and above all, aggressive attacks. It is an external martial art, meaning the power is expressed outward, kinetic, explosive, generated in the body and released into space. Firebenders generate their own power. They do not redirect. They do not absorb. They extend and strike and drive forward. This is the fundamental philosophical difference between firebending and every other element in the show. Water redirects, earth absorbs, air evades, fire attacks. There is something important in that difference. Water, earth, and air are all, in some sense, responsive arts. They wait, they receive, they redirect, or absorb, or avoid. Fire generates. Fire is the only element that does not require an external source to bend. A waterbender needs water nearby. An earthbender needs earth. An airbender is surrounded by air. But a firebender carries their element inside them. They produce it from their own internal energy, from breath and will and heat. This makes firebending uniquely dangerous and uniquely revealing of character. Every other bender is in conversation with their element. A firebender is their element. Airbending is based on Bagua Zhang, the 8-trigram palm, one of the 3 internal martial arts of the Wudang school. Bagua is perhaps the most unusual of the major Chinese martial arts in terms of what it looks like from outside, because its defining technique is the circle walk. A Bagua practitioner moves constantly in a circular path around their opponent, never stopping, never setting their feet firmly, always in motion, always changing angle, always approaching from a direction the opponent is not prepared for. The entire defensive philosophy of Bagua is total evasion. You are never where the attack is. You move so fluidly and continuously that the opponent cannot find a fixed point to strike at. You create the impression of being everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. When you watch Aang fight, when you watch him spin and skip and redirect and avoid, when you watch him make even Fire Lord Ozai at full power look like he is swinging at the wind, you are watching Bagua Zhang. You are watching a martial tradition that was developed over 1,000 years of practice, a tradition with a complete philosophical framework about the nature of combat and avoidance and evasion, and you are watching it rendered in animation in the body of a 12-year-old boy whose entire culture was designed around never meeting force with force. But Toph's earthbending is different. This is one of the most overlooked details in a show full of overlooked details, and it rewards careful attention. Every other earthbender in Avatar uses Hung Gar. Their stances are wide and deep. Their power comes from rooting themselves in the ground. When Aang trains earthbending, when Bumi fights, when the Earth Rumble competitors clash, you are watching Hung Gar's philosophy in motion. But Toph uses Chugar's southern praying mantis, which is a completely different discipline, developed in a different region, based on a different set of principles. Chugar uses narrower, higher stances. It emphasizes close quarters combat, arm and hand strikes with specific attention to the wrists and palms, sensitivity to the opponent's movements, interception rather than absorption. It is a style developed for a practitioner who reads combat through physical sensitivity rather than through visual dominance of the field. A Chugar fighter does not need to see where the attack is coming from, they need to feel it. The animators changed Toph's martial art entirely because Hungar's wide-rooted stances did not fit who she is. Toph is blind. She is small. She does not see the world the way other earthbenders do. Her seismic sense gives her information that travels through the soles of her feet, through vibrations in the ground, through the physical sensation of the world pressing against the earth she stands on. Her entire experience of combat is tactile and proprioceptive rather than visual. And Chugar's emphasis on sensitivity, on reading the opponent through touch and physical interception, mirrors this perfectly. The martial art is not just aesthetically different from the other earthbenders. It is philosophically appropriate to someone whose relationship with the physical world is fundamentally different from anyone else's. If you watch Toph fight and compare her movements to Boomy or to the Earth Rumble fighters, the difference is visible even if you cannot name what you are seeing. She moves differently. Her hands move differently. Her weight distribution is different. She does not stomp to connect with the earth. She stands on it quietly and listens. The fight comes to her through the ground and she responds to what the ground tells her. The martial art is the character. The character is the martial art. Iroh's lightning redirection deserves its own extended meditation here, because it is one of the most precisely executed visual philosophical moments in the entire series. In Book 2, Iroh explains to Zuko that he invented the technique of lightning redirection by studying waterbenders. He observed that waterbenders redirect force rather than resisting it, and he applied that principle to lightning, creating a technique that had never existed before in firebending. This is a significant plot point. It establishes Iroh as someone capable of genuine philosophical synthesis, someone who broke out of the philosophical box of his nation's martial tradition by learning to think like a different element. It is one of the clearest statements the show makes about the limitations of a single elemental philosophy and the power of genuine intellectual openness. But the creators and animators did not just tell you this. They showed it in the animation in a way that you can see clearly once you know what to look for. When Iroh or Zuko redirect lightning, the movement they use is not Northern Shaolin, it is Tai Chi. The animators actually switch the martial art mid-technique. The moment the lightning enters the body, the firebending posture gives way to the fluid, circular movements of waterbending. The lightning travels up the arm in a circular motion, crosses the chest, descends through the center of the body, travels down the opposite side, and exits through the other hand, following the same internal energy circulation principles that define Tai Chi and waterbending philosophy. The movement is yielding. It receives the force and redirects it rather than opposing it. In the space of approximately 2 seconds on screen, you are watching a documented philosophical and martial arts shift, a firebender using a waterbender's discipline because a firebender learned to think like water. The animation communicates this to anyone who knows what they are looking at and does it without a single word of dialogue. The technique looks different from every other firebending technique in the show because it is different. It is a different art. It is a different philosophy. It is the moment where the categories break down, and the breaking down is visible in how the body moves. Sifu Kisu also worked on the non-bending fighters, because the show's commitment to martial authenticity did not stop at elemental combat. The Kyoshi warriors used Tessen Jutsu, the Japanese martial art of the iron fan, a style developed by samurai who carried folding fans as weapons in situations where swords were inappropriate. The Tessen moves, the way the fans sweep and block and redirect, the precision of close-range strikes with the fan's reinforced edge, are specific to that discipline. Suki's fighting style has a character that is distinct from the bending disciplines because it comes from a completely different martial tradition with a completely different cultural history. Mai's knife technique reflects the sharp, economical movements of someone trained in the throwing arts, with the precise, almost casual accuracy of a practitioner who has repeated these movements so many times that the mechanical calculation has been entirely internalized. Ty Lee's chi blocking draws from Chin Na, a Chinese martial art focused on joint locks, muscle grabs, and pressure point manipulation, adapted into a style that combines the acrobatic movement of gymnastics with the targeted precision of a discipline designed to temporarily disable a person's ability to move normally. The pressure points Ty Lee targets in the animation correspond to real acupressure points on the human body. Her chi blocking is not fantastical disruption of some invented energy system. It is a fictional version of a real practice with real anatomical principles behind it. What this means, and this is the part that settles into you the more you think about it, is that every time you watched a fight in Avatar and felt like you were watching something real, like the movements made physical sense in a way that most animated action does not, you were right. You were watching reality filtered through animation. You were watching human bodies moving in ways that were developed over centuries of martial practice, now rendered in ink and color, performing the same function they always performed, but in a world made of light. That feeling of physical truth in the fight scenes was not an accident. It was a man named Kisu performing forms in a room in California, being recorded, the recording being sent to South Korea, South Korean animators copying those movements frame by frame onto the bodies of characters whose philosophies matched the philosophies of the martial arts they were practicing. Every punch, every redirect, every wide stance and circular step and air scooter, and water whip that ever made you lean forward in your seat. All of it real, all of it chosen, all of it there. Part 3. The music underneath everything. Before Jeremy Zuckerman, the original plan for Avatar's score was to use no Western instruments at all. This was a genuine concept explored early in the show's production. The idea was to fill the recording studio with instruments from across the non-Western world, instruments that most of the audience would never have encountered before, and simply experiment with what they could make together. The concept was impractical given the timeline and the budget available to a Nickelodeon animated series in 2004, but the spirit of the idea persisted. When Zuckerman and his production partner Benjamin Wynn formed their music company, the Track Team, and began developing the Avatar score, the non-Western instrument philosophy remained at the center of their approach. Zuckerman spent time learning from musicians experienced in Chinese classical instruments, not because he was going to perform them himself, but because he wanted to understand them from the inside. He wanted to know why a pipa sounds the way it does, what the guqin is designed to express, how the erhu produces that particular quality of human-adjacent emotion that makes it so effective in scenes of grief or longing. He was not sampling these instruments from a library. He was building a relationship with them. The result is a score that does something most television scores do not do. Most television scores create a consistent sonic palette for the whole show and then vary the tone within that palette to reflect the emotional temperature of individual scenes. Zuckerman's Avatar score has 4 distinct palettes, one for each nation, and they are genuinely different from each other, not just tonally, but instrumentally and culturally. The Water Tribe themes are built on woodwinds and drums that carry the quality of circumpolar indigenous music. There is a particular spaciousness to these themes. Wide open intervals, the feeling of distance, of silence that exists in places where the nearest human being might be very far away. When you hear Katara and Sokka's home themes, you hear cold air and the specific quality of light on ice. The instrumentation makes the Southern Water Tribe feel like a place before a single establishing shot has to do any of that work. The Earth Kingdom themes draw on the Chinese classical tradition. The guqin, which is one of the oldest instruments in Chinese culture and is associated with scholars and philosophers and the inner life of thoughtful people. The erhu, which produces a tone that sits at the edge of human voice, something that feels familiar in a way that resists clear explanation. The pipa, which carries brightness and a particular kind of formal beauty. These are instruments with documented histories stretching back thousands of years, instruments that appear in the paintings of Chinese court culture and in the gardens of scholars who spent their lives in philosophical contemplation. When the music of Ba Sing Se sounds like it has been here before, like it knows things it is not going to share with you, the instrumentation is doing a significant part of that work. The Fire Nation uses taiko drums and brass. The taiko is a Japanese percussion instrument with deep historical associations with military tradition. It was used in the context of battle to coordinate movement and signal commands, and it carries the sonic signature of power asserted rhythmically, power that moves on schedule, power that does not accommodate itself to anyone else's timing. Combined with brass instruments that carry the register of ceremony and announcement, the Fire Nation themes feel like something coming toward you that is not going to stop. The Air Nomad themes, which appear rarely because the Air Nomads are largely gone from the world, and the show encounters them primarily through memory and spiritual contact, use Tibetan singing bowls and bamboo flutes. There is a quality to Tibetan singing bowls that is genuinely unlike almost any other instrument. The resonance is not quite musical in the Western harmonic sense, not quite environmental in the way that ambient sound is. It sits at the threshold of consciousness. It sounds like the space between a waking thought and a dream, like the particular quality of attention you have in the moments just before sleep takes you, when you are still aware, but the ordinary categories of thought have begun to soften. When those tones appear under a scene of Aang meditating, or entering the spirit world, or sitting quietly with the weight of everything he has lost, the instrument is doing exactly the right thing. It is summoning something that cannot quite be articulated, something present but untouchable, something that existed and was taken and left only its echo. When Aang enters the avatar state, all four musical palettes converge at once. The instruments of all four nations sound simultaneously, creating what Zuckerman crafted as a dissonant, powerful chord. The music is not just accompanying the visual. The music is telling you something that the animation cannot say by itself. It is telling you that what you are watching is not a boy. It is four nations in one body. It is 10,000 years of human history channeled through a 12-year-old who did not ask for any of this. The music says this in a fraction of a second, and you feel it before you understand it, because music moves faster than thought. The show's composer also worked on the sound design through the track team, which meant that the audio world of Avatar was built with a unified vision. The music and the sound effects come from the same philosophical place. And the sound effects themselves are worth dwelling on, because they were designed with as much intentionality as the score. Every element has a unique sound design that reflects not just what the element is, but how it is being used and who is using it. Waterbending made by a frightened bender sounds different from waterbending made by a confident one. The water moves the same way on screen, but the audio signature changes. There is something tighter and less fluid about frightened bending, something that tells you the bender is not fully in harmony with the element they are trying to move. Firebending produced through discipline has a different texture from firebending produced through rage. Earthbending during a moment of crisis, when the bender is pushing past their limits, carries a weight that you do not hear in casual practice. Airbending is perhaps the most interesting of the four in terms of sound design. It is built primarily from processed wind recordings, given a slightly musical quality, as if the air itself is producing tones rather than simply rushing past. This is consistent with the philosophical identity of the air nomads, who experience their element as something essentially alive, something that sings rather than simply moves. When Aang bends air in contexts of play or joy, the sound has a light singing quality. When he bends in grief or anger, those moments are rare and deeply felt in the show. The sound shifts into something that carries weight, something that does not sound like freedom. But the greatest use of sound in Avatar is not a sound at all. The show uses silence more deliberately and more effectively than almost any other animated series. There are moments where the music cuts out entirely, and the silence does not create absence. It creates presence. A particular kind of presence that comes from the removal of everything that was cushioning you from the moment. When Aang discovers the skeleton of his mentor, Monk Gyatso, at the Southern Air Temple, surrounded by the bones of Fire Nation soldiers, the music stops. What you hear is only the wind through a ruined temple. That is all. The silence holds the full weight of a 100-year-old massacre and the grief of a boy who is only now understanding what he is the last of. No score could add to that. The silence is the score. When Zuko redirects lightning at his father Ozai during the Day of Black Sun and walks away, the music drops out. When Katara stands at the door of the soldier who killed her mother and decides not to take revenge, the music drops out. When Aang wakes up in Ba Sing Se after what should have been his death in the Book 2 finale, with no context and no explanation, and the hollow sound of a world that does not yet know he is alive, the music drops out. The decision to use silence in these moments was made during the animatic stage, before the composer ever received those scenes. The silence was built into the structure of the episodes before the music was written. The creators were saying, "Here is a frame that requires nothing added. The scene is complete. Let it breathe." Jeremy Zuckerman composed the series using primarily MIDI tracks, working within significant technological and budget limitations for most of the run. The final episodes of Book 3, the Sozon's Comet finale, were recorded with a live ensemble. If you listen carefully, the difference is audible. There is a fullness to the finale's music, a warmth and dimension that the MIDI work, excellent as it was, could not quite replicate. But even the MIDI compositions were built with a level of cultural specificity and structural sophistication that most orchestral television scores do not reach. Zuckerman won a Primetime Emmy for his work on the show. The show itself won a Peabody Award in 2008, and the score is currently being released in its expanded, fully orchestrated form by Republic Records, with Book 1 already out and Book 2 and 3 following, restoring and expanding the compositions with the resources that were not available during the original production. The music is coming back into the world in a new form, the way all good things eventually find the form they were always reaching for. 4 nations, 4 sonic palettes, 1 convergence, silence in exactly the right places. A score that was built with the same invisible care as the calligraphy on the scrolls. You felt it without knowing you were being told something. You absorbed it without knowing it was designed. Part 4. The world has rules. There is a full moon during the siege of the North Pole. That moon, the full moon that amplifies Katara's waterbending and eventually gives Yua the power to give her life to the moon spirit, was not invented for that episode. It was earned. For every nighttime scene across all of Book 1, the animators tracked the lunar cycle. They paid attention to what phase the moon was in during the previous nighttime episode and advanced it forward by the appropriate number of days based on the in-show timeline. The moon in Avatar waxes and wanes consistently across the season. The show's production team maintained a timeline document to track this progression, ensuring that the seasonal and lunar changes were consistent across episodes and not subject to the kind of continuity errors that plague productions without this level of detail. If you go back through Book 1 and track the shape of the moon in the background of nighttime scenes, the progression is real. It follows a genuine lunar cycle. The full moon at the siege of the North Pole is the full moon because the calendar of events in Book 1 adds up to approximately 1 lunar cycle from Aang's discovery in the iceberg to the climax of the season. The show did not say, "Here is a convenient full moon at the moment we need the waterbending to be strongest." The show built a world in which moons follow their orbits, and then told a story that reached its crisis point at the natural conclusion of that orbit. The waterbending moon connection and the firebending sun connection are mirrors of each other, and the show uses this symmetry with enormous patience. The moon connection is established in Book 1, early enough that it becomes simply part of how you understand waterbending. You know that the full moon makes waterbenders stronger. You file it away. And then, a full season and a half later, in Book 3, the Day of Black Sun plot emerges, built around the fact that a solar eclipse removes firebenders' power entirely. The same rule, the same elemental logic, applied to the other side of the equation. The show had to know, when it established the moon rule in Book 1, that it was going to need the sun rule in Book 3. Both sides of the symmetry were designed simultaneously, one planted in the first season and one held in reserve until it was dramatically useful. When the eclipse episode arrives, viewers feel a click of recognition, a sense that this makes sense, that the world behaves according to rules that were established before they were needed. That click is the reward for having built a world with real internal logic, rather than inventing convenient powers at convenient moments. The number 4 runs through the show with a cultural resonance that most Western viewers do not immediately perceive. In Chinese and Japanese cultures, the number 4 carries specific weight because the word for 4 in both Mandarin and Japanese sounds nearly identical to the word for death. It is considered an unlucky number in both traditions, and many buildings in East Asian countries omit the 4th floor in their numbering systems for precisely this reason. The Avatar world is built around 4 nations, 4 elements, 4 seasons, 4 bending disciplines, 4 cardinal directions. The air temples are positioned at the 4 cardinal points of the world. The Avatar cycle moves through 4 nations before it completes and begins again. The connection to death is not incidental. The Avatar cycle is explicitly a cycle of death and rebirth. The Avatar dies, and the next Avatar is born in the next nation in the cycle. The 4 is the engine of continuity. The number that means death is also the number that means the story does not end. It only changes who is telling it. The creators were aware of the cultural weight of the number. They built it into the foundations of the world with full knowledge of what it carried. The elemental philosophy of the four nations extends beyond the elements themselves into the philosophical orientations of the cultures that practice them. Air is freedom, and the air nomads are literally nomadic, unconstrained by territory, unattached to possessions, moving continuously through the world without the kind of fixed location that other nations define as home. Water is change, and the water tribes survive in environments that require constant adaptation, that shift with the seasons between extreme cold and relative warmth, that demand flexibility as a condition of survival. Earth is stability, and the Earth Kingdom is defined by its immovability, by cities that have stood for centuries, by a people who fight hardest when they are defending the specific ground beneath their feet. Fire is power, and the Fire Nation generates its own energy rather than drawing it from the environment, which is why a Fire Nation soldier is never at a disadvantage the way an Earthbender might be fighting on stone-free ground or a Waterbender might be in a desert. These philosophical differences produce practical differences in how the nations relate to the war. The Water Tribes survive through adaptation and endurance. The Earth Kingdom resists through sheer immovability. The Air Nomads cannot fight a war because war requires holding ground, and the Air Nomads' philosophy is to release ground rather than hold it. And the Fire Nation wages a 100-year war because it carries its power inside itself and does not need any particular place to sustain that power. The elements are not just visual distinctions. They are complete worldviews expressed through bodies in motion. The biology of the Avatar world also follows consistent rules. Water can be bent from the moisture in the air, which is established before bloodbending appears but prepares you for the logic that makes bloodbending possible. Earth can be bent only when the bender perceives the earth within a material, which is the rule that leads directly to Toph's discovery of metal bending, when she perceives the tiny earth impurities trapped in the supposedly unbendable, refined metal of her cage. Fire is generated internally by the bender rather than drawn from external sources, which makes firebending uniquely independent but also uniquely revealing about internal state. Air is everywhere and can always be bent. These rules are never presented as rules. They are demonstrated through action, through events, through the physics of how fights play out. You learn them by watching the world work. And when new capabilities emerge from them, like metal bending or blood bending or lightning generation, those capabilities feel earned because they follow from the established logic. The show never gives you a power that does not have roots in what was already there. Sozin's comet returns every 100 years. The 100-year return interval is plausible within real astrophysics. Some periodic comets have orbital periods of roughly a century. Halley's Comet, the most famous example, returns approximately every 75 to 79 years. The show's choice of a round century is dramatic and also genuinely possible within the behavior of objects in space. The Avatar world follows orbital mechanics, even when those orbits carry fire-amplifying dust across the sky. The comet is not just a deadline, it is a recurring historical trauma. Sozin used the comet's first passage 100 years before the show's events to amplify Fire Nation power to the level necessary to wipe out the air nomads in a single day. Now Ozai wants to use its second passage to burn the Earth Kingdom into submission. The astronomical event that made the worst atrocity in the show's history possible is returning. The comet does not choose who uses it. It simply comes, and the world has to decide what to do when it arrives. Aang has approximately 1 year from his release from the iceberg to master all 4 elements and be ready. The comet is the deadline. The deadline was never invented to create dramatic tension. It was built into the world from the moment Firelord Sozin looked up at a comet and made a decision that changed everything. The world has rules. The rules have weight, and the weight accumulates across seasons and episodes and years of real time into a finale that does not feel like an ending the writers invented, but like the conclusion the world itself was always moving toward. Part 5. Characters written in light and shadow. Zuko's scar is a camera cue. This is something the storyboard artists used consistently across 3 seasons, and most viewers feel its effect without ever seeing the mechanism. When Zuko is operating from a place of anger, of shame, of his worst self, of the version of him that his father built and his nation shaped, and his banishment enforced, the camera tends to frame him from the scarred side of his face, the damaged half, the half that Ozai put there. When Zuko is showing growth, compassion, vulnerability, or genuine human connection, the camera tends to show the unscarred side. This is documented in the show through an extraordinary moment of self-awareness in Book 3, when Azula comments that Zuko should make sure his royal portrait captures his good side. The camera lingers on his scar as she says this, and the show is doing something more interesting than simple irony. The question of which side is the good side turns out not to have the obvious answer. Visually, the unscarred side might seem like the answer, the conventionally handsome side, the unmarked side, but the scar represents survival. It represents the moment Zuko stood in an Agni Kai against his father and refused to fight him, which was an act of moral clarity that cost him his home and his social standing and left a permanent mark on his face. The scar is not where he failed. It is where he refused to do something wrong, even when everything he had was the price of refusal. When Zuko walks away from his father during the Day of Black Sun, when he delivers the speech that represents his full, irreversible commitment to the right side of history, the camera shifts to show only the unscarred side as he turns. The show has spent 3 seasons using this visual language, and at this moment it uses the unscarred side to say, the decision has been made. The person you are looking at is not the person who is trying to capture the avatar. This is who he actually is. In Book 2, there is a scene where Zuko has a nightmare and imagines himself as an unscarred Fire Lord. His dream self, the version of him that has his father's approval and his nation's recognition, and everything he told himself he wanted, has no scar. And the show's visual language means that the unscarred Zuko in the dream is not the better version. It is the version that never refused, the version that never stood in front of his father and chose something else. The scar is not the thing he needs to escape. It is the proof of something he did right. The original decision to give Zuko a scar came from a production meeting in the early development of the show, when Eric Coleman, an executive producer, suggested that the character needed something distinctive. Brian Konietzko asked whether the character could have a scar. The scar was approved. But what the creative team then did with it, building a 3-season visual grammar around which side of that scarred face the camera chose to show in any given moment, that is the creative work that turned a character design choice into a narrative tool. Azula's fire deserves its own careful attention. She is the only firebender in the original series whose flames are blue. The production design is grounded enough in real physics to make this meaningful. Blue fire burns hotter than orange fire. In actual combustion chemistry, the color of a flame corresponds to its temperature, with blue and white indicating higher combustion temperatures than orange and red. A candle flame is mostly orange and yellow because the burning wax produces relatively cool combustion. A gas burner's hottest portion is blue. Pure hydrogen burns with an almost invisible blue flame. The show's color choice for Azula is telling you, through the physics of combustion, that her firebending is more intense, more refined, and more dangerous than anyone else's. She is not just better than other firebenders. She is producing fire of a fundamentally higher quality. The Agni Kai between Azula and Zuko in the finale is color-coded in a way that functions as visual narration throughout the entire fight. The scene is dominated by blues and oranges, Azula's blue fire and Zuko's orange, and as the fight progresses and Azula becomes more erratic, the blue becomes wilder, less controlled, less precisely aimed. Her fire, which has always been defined by its precision, is now explosive and desperate. The orange, by contrast, remains steady. Zuko's fire in this scene is not more powerful than Azula's, but it is controlled by someone who is not falling apart, and the contrast between steady orange and chaotic blue tells the story of the fight in color before a single word of dialogue or a single moment of explicit drama. Zuko's hair is a complete timeline of his psychological state across 3 seasons. In Book 1, he has the traditional Fire Nation top knot that signals his identity as a prince and his commitment to the mission his father gave him. At the beginning of Book 2, he cuts it off himself in a scene where Iroh's reaction to the act carries enormous emotional weight, because Iroh understands immediately what the cutting of the top knot means. This is not a haircut. It is a rejection of the identity his father assigned him. The top knot does not just represent his rank, it represents his commitment to the story Ozai told about who Zuko is and what Zuko owes. Through Book 2, his hair grows out in the uneven, slightly overgrown way of someone between selves. He looks like someone who has cut off the old identity but does not yet have a new one to grow into. The hair of displacement. The hair of someone living in the in-between. When he returns to the Fire Nation in Book 3 and briefly reclaims the appearance of a prince, the top knot comes back, but it never quite sits the way it did in Book 1. It looks performed rather than natural. It looks like someone putting on a costume they used to live in and finding that it no longer fits the body underneath. And by the finale, Zuko's hair is worn loose and natural, the way it falls when nobody has arranged it to make a statement about who you are. It falls the way it does when the person wearing it has stopped asking for anyone's approval. The hair is done performing, so is he. Color theory operates on every character in the show, but it works most precisely on Zuko because his story is fundamentally about two competing identities and which one wins. The Earth Kingdom greens that seep into his wardrobe and surroundings during his Book 2 exile are not random costume choices. They are the show's visual record of his environment getting into him. He is absorbing the Earth Kingdom, and the Earth Kingdom colors are absorbing him, and neither of them is doing it consciously. It is just what happens when you live somewhere long enough with enough genuine feeling for the people around you. When the Reds return with his return to the Fire Nation, they are darker and more muted than the bright, saturated reds of Book 1. The Fire Nation no longer looks like home, because it is no longer home. The palette knows this before the character can say it. The way Aang runs is also designed to communicate character through movement in a way most viewers absorb without registering. Aang does not run like other characters. His running animation has less ground contact, a lighter, skimming quality, as if he is perpetually on the verge of becoming airborne. He does not pound the earth the way Sokka runs, or stride with the weight of an earthbender, or move with the deliberate, centered momentum of someone trained in grounded combat. He moves the way someone would move if they were only touching the ground because they had chosen to, temporarily, and might choose otherwise at any moment. This is not a result of his being physically lighter than the other characters, though he is small. It is the result of the animators making a deliberate decision to give Aang a locomotion cycle that reflects his element even when he is not actively bending. He is an airbender. Even in the most mundane physical action, the relationship between his body and the ground beneath it is different from anyone else's. He touches the earth with permission rather than weight. He is always, in some small way, a little bit about to fly. Part 6. The small details that hold the world together. Toph sleeps with her feet elevated. If you watch every camping scene across all 3 seasons of Avatar, if you pay careful attention to where Toph positions herself when the group stops for the night, you will find her with her feet propped up, against a rock, against a log, against a raised mound of earth that she sometimes bends into shape herself specifically for this purpose. The show never explains this. No character ever comments on it. No episode draws attention to it. It is simply there, embedded in the background of nearly every camping scene, for viewers who are paying close enough attention to notice. Toph sees through the soles of her feet. Her seismic sense, the earthbending perception that allows her to navigate a world she cannot see with her eyes, transmits information through vibrations in the ground. Every footstep within range, every animal moving through brush 50 feet away, every person approaching from behind, every heartbeat of someone close. This constant influx of vibrational data is how she experiences the world, and she cannot simply close her eyes and shut it off the way a sighted person can close their eyes and shut out light. The information comes through contact. Her feet are always on and always receiving. If her feet are touching the ground while she sleeps, she is still seeing, still receiving every vibration within her range, every insect, every small animal, every shift and settling of the earth. The constant signal would make it impossible to rest. Lifting her feet off the ground is the equivalent of closing her eyes. It is how she turns off her perception so that her mind can stop processing the world and actually sleep. This is a detail about a character's disability that the creators worked out at the level of daily behavior and then embedded into the background of every camping scene without comment. The people who made Avatar understood Toph's seismic sense well enough to think through its implications for how she sleeps. Not for a plot reason, not because an episode would ever be about this, but because if the world were real, this is what she would do, and the world had to be real. The wanted poster for Toph that appears in Fire Nation territory in Book 3 contains specific calligraph text in real Chinese characters that reads approximately, Authorities are offering a reward of 1,000 gold coins for the arrest of this 12-year-old girl. She disguises herself as a blind person, and although she is small, she is extremely dangerous. Any information will be promptly rewarded. The fact that the poster notes her disguise as a blind person is the kind of institutional misunderstanding that the show captures perfectly. Toph is not disguising herself as blind. She is blind. The Fire Nation authorities have seen a small blind girl defeat their soldiers and concluded that the blindness must be an act. Sokka's boomerang deserves careful consideration as a narrative object, not just a comedic one. It is established in the very first episode as a Water Tribe weapon, one of the few possessions Sokka carried from home into the journey. And across 3 seasons, every single time Sokka throws his boomerang, it comes back. Every time. The return is played for laughs, often in the context of Sokka forgetting that it will come back, or it returning at an inconvenient moment, or it arriving just in time to save someone who was not expecting it. The joke is a running thread through the entire series, but the show is also doing something beneath the comedy. The boomerang always returns. Like Sokka himself, who, no matter how deep into foreign nations and foreign cultures and foreign philosophies this journey takes him, always carries the Water Tribe with him. The boomerang is the physical emblem of his origin, something he made or carried from home, something that follows the specific mechanics of the weapon traditions of his culture. It comes back because that is what this weapon does. And it comes back because Sokka always comes back to himself. In the Book 3 finale, in the chaos of the battle over the Fire Nation's airship fleet, the boomerang is lost. It does not return. The show never addresses this. Sokka does not pause to mourn it. There is no scene of him looking at the empty spot on his belt. The loss simply stands, unremarked, in the middle of everything else. And viewers who have watched that boomerang return every single time for 3 seasons feel the absence as something significant without being able to entirely articulate why. The image has done its work so quietly and for so long that its absence at the moment when Sokka needs it most, when everything is at stake, when he is completing the most important mission of his life, carries a weight that no single episode could have given it. The boomerang came back 50 times, so that when it finally did not, the not coming back would mean something. Momo's name is a small bilingual joke that exists in the first act of the show and never comes up again. Momo means peach in Japanese. When Aang first encounters Momo at the Southern Air Temple, the lemur is eating a peach. The name is not translated. It is not explained. It is simply there, a private detail in a language most of the audience does not speak. For viewers who speak Japanese, for anyone who happens to look it up, for the one kid in 1,000 who learns this and feels the particular small delight of finding a secret that was always sitting in plain sight. It is the kind of name a 12-year-old who has been alone in an iceberg for 100 years would give an animal he just met. He named it after the thing it was doing when they found each other. Simple, immediate, natural, and only meaningful and full in a language that is not the language of the show. It is a detail for someone. The show was full of those. It was full of details that were not for everyone, that were for the specific someone who would notice them. Appa's saddle was designed as functional equipment, not visual prop. It has a raised rim that prevents passengers from being thrown off during flight at altitude and speed. It has storage compartments that the group accesses consistently across the series, always in the same location relative to the saddle's structure. It has a rein system connected to Appa's horns that allows directional communication from the rider. These are design decisions that answer the practical question of how you transport 4 people and their essential gear on the back of a flying animal for 3 years. The saddle appears consistently across 61 episodes in the same configuration, with the same compartments, the same rim, the same reins. The consistency itself is part of the world building. The saddle is always the saddle. It does not change shape between episodes. It is not a background element that the animators redraw differently each time it appears. It is a specific designed object that exists in the world, and its existence in the world is confirmed by its consistency across time. The Earth King's bear named Bosco deserves a moment here. Bosco is not a platypus bear. He is not an armadillo bear or a badger mole or any other hybrid creature. He is simply a bear, a regular bear, a large mammal that eats honey and berries and does not have any additional features drawn from incompatible species. In the Avatar world, where every animal is a hybrid of two real animals, a creature that is only one thing is the strange thing. When Team Avatar first hears about the Earth King's bear that is just a bear, their reaction is confused alarm. A platypus bear makes sense. A regular bear is unsettling. The gag functions as comedy. But it also does precise character work on the Earth King, who has spent his entire life inside Ba Sing Se's walls, managed and manipulated by Long Feng, isolated from the real world by extraordinary privilege and deliberate institutional deception. Even his pet came from outside normal experience. The most powerful ruler in the Earth Kingdom has a regular bear because the normal things in his world are not the things that are normal to anyone outside his walls. Reality itself has become exotic to him. The ordinary is the strange thing. Part 7. The real world inside the fantasy. The air temples are modeled on real monasteries, not approximately modeled, not inspired by, researched and rendered with enough architectural specificity that someone familiar with the buildings that were used as reference would recognize them. The Western air temple draws most heavily from Bhutanese Dzong architecture, the distinctive fortress monastery style found in the Himalayan kingdoms of Bhutan and the historic borderlands of Tibet. Dzongs are massive, self-contained religious and administrative structures built into cliff sides, with inward slanting fortress walls, wide eaves, and the quality of a place designed to be inaccessible. Tiger's Nest Monastery, Paro Taktsang, in Bhutan, clings to a cliff face at approximately 10,000 feet of elevation, accessible only by a narrow mountain path, and has occupied its position since the 8th century. The Western Air Temple, built into the underside of a cliff face so that its towers hang downward from the rock above, takes the concept of inaccessibility that defines places like Tiger's Nest and makes it literal in a way that only an airbender community would find practical. The southern and northern air temples draw from the pagoda tradition of Chinese Buddhist architecture. The multi-level towers with characteristic roofline breaks between each floor that appear throughout China and across East and Southeast Asia. These temples feel ancient not just because the story establishes them as ancient, but because the architectural vocabulary the animators drew from has genuine age in it. The design language of these structures carries the accumulated meaning of centuries of real buildings, and that accumulated meaning reaches the viewer as the particular quality of oldness that the air temples have. The creators traveled to Beijing between Book 1 and Book 2, and their time in the city changed how they imagined Ba Sing Se. They walked through the Forbidden City. They saw the concentric organization of Imperial Beijing, where the inner rings near the palace were the province of the aristocracy, and the outer rings housed the ordinary population. This direct observation is reflected in Ba Sing Se's structure with remarkable precision. The lower ring, with its crowded markets and refugee camps, and the kind of economic desperation that is the precondition for everything the Dai Li exploits, is the outer ring. The upper ring, with its wide streets and polished buildings and the Earth King's palace at the center, is the inner ring. The social geography of an actual historical city was transposed into a fantasy capital. The royal palace of Ba Sing Se was modeled on the Forbidden City, including the architectural tradition of rulers who were functionally sealed inside its walls and kept from encountering the reality of the world their governance was supposed to serve. The Forbidden City was not literally a prison, but it was a complete world unto itself, and the isolation it created was both a feature of imperial power and a mechanism of imperial vulnerability. The Earth King does not know the war has lasted 100 years, not because he is stupid or cruel, but because the institution around him was designed to keep knowledge from reaching him, and that institution was designed, consciously or not, by people who understood that a ruler who knows too much cannot be managed. The Dai Li themselves are named after General Dai Li of the Chinese Nationalist Party's secret service, the Kuomintang, who led intelligence and counterintelligence operations in mid-20th century China. Their uniforms reference multiple periods of Chinese military and official dress, with their conical hats echoing those worn by Qing dynasty mandarins, and their square embroidery referencing the mandarin square worn by Chinese officials during the Ming and Qing dynasties. Every element of their visual design has a historical reference behind it. They look the way they look because someone researched what institutional power and its enforcement apparatus look like in real historical East Asian contexts, and then rendered that research in animation. The Water Tribe costumes are based on Inuit and Yupik clothing traditions, which are functional responses to extreme cold environments refined over generations of Arctic life. The layered furs, the hood designs, the specific construction of garments designed to trap body heat while allowing movement, these are not aesthetic choices borrowed for visual interest. They are clothing that works in the conditions the water tribe lives in, and the show's decision to depict the water tribes in culturally specific garments rather than generic fantasy cold weather gear gives the characters a grounding in real human experience. The design of the clothing is part of the argument the show is making about the world. These are real people with real knowledge. Their garments carry the accumulated practical wisdom of generations of Arctic life. The koi fish in the Spirit Oasis at the North Pole deserve extended attention. 2 fish, one black with a white spot, one white with a black spot. They swim in a continuous circular pattern around each other, and their circling pattern is the Tai Chi, the yin-yang symbol, enacted by 2 living creatures. The black and white halves of the symbol, the complementary opposites that define the Taoist conception of balance as dynamic relationship rather than static equality, are there, alive and swimming, in a small pool at the edge of the world. The symbol is not displayed, it is lived. 2 fish just being what they are, moving together in the way they have always moved, maintaining the balance of the world by continuing to exist in relationship with each other. When Zhao kills the moon spirit by reaching into that pool and taking hold of the white koi, he is not just killing a fish. He is reaching into the oldest symbol in the show's philosophical vocabulary and destroying one half of it with his hands. He is breaking the circle. He is removing complementarity from the world and replacing it with dominance. The moment has the weight it has because the symbol had been alive and swimming in that pool for long enough to become real, and because the show understood exactly what it was destroying when it let Zhao destroy it. The food in Avatar deserves its own consideration. Fire Nation food is spicy, featuring dishes associated with warm climates and East and Southeast Asian cooking traditions. Earth Kingdom cuisine draws from Chinese regional cooking, with the variety and scale appropriate to a nation whose agricultural territory is vast. Water tribe food, in the scenes where it appears, reflects an Arctic diet built around fish, sea mammals, and the few preserved foods that travel well in cold environments. The infamous sea prune stew that Sokka cannot stop complaining about is a specific water tribe culinary tradition that exists because sea prunes are the kind of thing that keeps in extreme cold and provides the calories necessary for a life of physical activity in a frozen environment. Air nomad food, seen in flashbacks and temple scenes, is entirely vegetarian, consistent with the Tibetan Buddhist monastic diet that the air nomads are modeled on. When Aang refuses meat across 3 seasons, when he quietly eats around the meat dishes that the group shares or finds his own food at stops where what is available is not consistent with his values, the show is maintaining a small, constant detail about cultural identity and personal integrity that most children's shows would not bother to establish, let alone sustain. These food details are not plot points. No episode turns on what the characters are eating for dinner. But the consistency of them, the fact that Aang's plate always looks different from Sokka's, the fact that Water Tribe food has specific dishes rather than generic animated food, the fact that the cuisine of the Earth Kingdom changes visibly as the group moves through different regions. These consistencies build the feeling that the world exists beyond the edges of the screen, that if you walked into the frame and around the corner, there would be more world there, following the same rules. Part 8. The Hidden Grief. On the 21st of July 2006, Mako Iwamatsu died of esophageal cancer. He was 72 years old. Mako was the voice of Iroh for the first 2 seasons of Avatar, The Last Airbender. He was also a founding member of the East-West Players, the longest-running Asian American theater company in the United States, an organization he helped create specifically to build space for Asian American actors in an industry that was systematically excluding them. He was an Oscar-nominated actor, nominated for his performance in the 1966 film The Sand Pebbles. He was the voice of Aku in Samurai Jack. He was, by every account of people who knew him, someone who brought warmth and wisdom into every room he entered, which is perhaps why the character he voiced in Avatar became the most loved character in the show. Book 2, Chapter 15, The Tales of Ba Sing Se, aired on the 29th of September, 2006. Approximately 2 months after Mako's death. One segment of that episode, called The Tale of Iroh, follows Iroh on an afternoon walk through the streets of Ba Sing Se, in which he demonstrates, simply and without fanfare, who he is when nobody is watching. He helps a crying child find her balloon. He helps a young man rehearse what he will say to the woman he loves. He redirects a mugger who tries to rob him without humiliating the young man, instead recognizing someone who is desperate and treating him with dignity. He takes a thief who breaks into his home and feeds him tea and sends him away with a full stomach because the thief was hungry and Iroh has something to give. And at the end of the episode, alone on a hillside, he sets up a small shrine and lights incense and sings a song to his dead son Lu Ten on what would have been Lu Ten's birthday. The song is one of the most affecting pieces of music in the entire series. Mako sang it himself. What is widely believed by fans and those connected to the production is that this recording was among the last work Mako completed for the show before his illness prevented him from continuing. Greg Baldwin, who had served as Mako's voice double for years and who took over the role for Book 3, has spoken publicly about this. When fans ask him to sing the song at conventions, he declines. He says it is not his song, it is Mako's. The episode ends with a simple dedication card. It reads, "In honor of Mako, no biography, no elaboration, just his name." And the moment, which was already written to be among the most emotionally honest things in the show, became something that the show could not have anticipated making. It became a memorial for a man who gave voice to the show's wisest character, and who demonstrated the same quality in his actual life that Iroh demonstrates in that hillside scene. A man who understood that what matters is what you give, and that you can always give something. Greg Baldwin's performance in Book 3 is worth examining carefully, because it represents one of the most successful and most considered voice transitions in animation history. Baldwin studied Mako's recordings extensively, paying attention not just to the tone and timbre of the voice, but to the specific phrasing, the pauses, the way Mako had developed Iroh's voice over 2 seasons into something with a specific gravitational quality, something warm and slow and full of the certainty of someone who has lived through enough to know what actually matters. Most viewers do not notice the change when they watch Book 3 for the first time. The voice carries the same warmth, the same measured quality, the same particular way that Iroh always sounds like he is about to tell you something that will stay with you. Baldwin did not try to disappear into an imitation. He honored a performance by understanding it deeply enough to continue it with integrity. The Legend of Korra later named a character Mako. Korra's love interest in Book 1 is named after the man who gave Iroh his voice. The show's way of saying that he is still in it, that his presence persists in the world that he helped make real. The show's treatment of grief more broadly deserves attention as one of its most sophisticated achievements. Aang is a survivor of genocide. The word is used carefully and rarely in the show itself, but the thing it describes is always present. Every air temple is a crime scene. Every room in every temple is full of the specific absence of the people who used to be in it. Aang walks through the Southern Air Temple in the first season and finds the skeleton of monk Gyatso surrounded by the bones of Fire Nation soldiers, and the show holds the weight of that moment with real courage. It does not cut away. It does not soften the horror into something more manageable. It shows a child discovering the remains of his mentor and understanding, fully and immediately, what these bones mean. And then it carries that understanding forward. Across 3 seasons, Aang has nightmares. He avoids direct engagement with the topic of the air nomad's end when he can. He has moments of rage, unexpected and frightening to the people around him, triggered by specific stimuli. He oscillates between numbness and overwhelming emotion in the way that real grief and real trauma actually functions. Not in the neat, stage-by-stage way that popular psychology has sometimes described grief, but in the messy, recursive, non-linear way that you experience when you are carrying something that has no bottom to it. The show depicts this without clinical language. It does not diagnose Aang. It does not use the vocabulary of therapy or trauma studies. It simply shows you what it looks like to be a person who survived something that should not have been survivable, and who has to keep getting up every day and doing the work of saving the world while carrying a weight that no weight training prepared him for. Iroh's grief for his son Lu Ten is the deepest wound in the show that is only ever partially revealed. The siege of Ba Sing Se, which Iroh led as the greatest general in Fire Nation history, ended when Lu Ten died in battle. Iroh lifted the siege immediately, turned his army around, and came home. He never spoke publicly about what happened. The official record of Fire Nation history records only that the siege was abandoned. What the show shows you, in fragments across 3 seasons, is that the death of his son broke something in Iroh that was never repaired in the old way, and that what grew in the space the break left was something different, and, ultimately, better. The man who sold tea in Ba Sing Se was not smaller than the general who once tried to conquer it. He was more complete. The grief had burned away the things in him that were not essential, and what was left was someone who knew, with the particular certainty of someone who has lost the most important thing, what actually mattered. Tea. Warmth. The look on a young person's face when they feel seen. The small human act of sitting across a table from someone and giving them something hot to drink. Part 9. The political machine. There is a line repeated by ordinary citizens of Ba Sing Se in a flat, practiced, slightly distant tone. The line is, "There is no war in Ba Sing Se. This is not a joke." It is one of the most politically precise observations the show makes, delivered with the particular calm of people who have been so thoroughly processed by a propaganda system that they have learned to deny observable reality with complete sincerity. It is not that these people are lying. They genuinely believe it. The denial has been installed so thoroughly and so early that it is no longer a decision. It is a fact about the world. The show built an entire city around this mechanism. Ba Sing Se is the most complete depiction of authoritarian information control in American children's animation. The Dai Li, the city's secret police, enforce not just physical control but informational control. They take anyone who mentions the war to a facility called Lake Laogai and use what the show depicts as a genuine coercive psychological technique. Repeated phrases delivered in a dim room while a lantern swings. The creators researched historical examples of coercive persuasion and adapted them for the show. The specific method depicted, environmental disorientation combined with repetition of desired beliefs, corresponds to documented techniques used in various historical contexts of political re-education. The phrase "there is no war in Ba Sing Se" has become one of the most quoted lines from the show, referenced by fans whenever they encounter an institution denying an observable reality. Its power comes from the accuracy of its depiction. It is not a fantasy version of propaganda. It is what propaganda actually is. The creation of an environment where the denial of observable reality becomes not just possible, but socially mandatory. Long Feng, who controls the Dai Li and through them effectively controls the Earth King, is not a cartoon villain. He is a bureaucrat who seized power through institutional means, who understood that the most durable form of control is the control of information, and who built the Dai Li into an apparatus for ensuring that the people who hold power in Ba Sing Se continue to hold it. He did not accomplish this through strength. He accomplished it through the patient construction of a system designed to make certain things invisible. The Fire Nation school system works according to the same principle. In Book 3, the episode called The Headband follows Aang undercover in a Fire Nation school. What he encounters is a system in which history is taught from a perspective that erases the origins of the war and justifies the Fire Nation's expansion as progress and generosity. Art is restricted to approved subjects. Music that might inspire independent feeling is forbidden. Students recite nationalistic affirmations at the start of each day. The teacher corrects Aang when he mentions facts about the air nomads that contradict the official account of why the air nomads no longer exist. Aang watches a classroom full of children learning to accept as truth things he knows are lies, and the show holds that situation with real maturity. It does not present the children as villains. It presents them as the products of a system that was designed to produce citizens who would not question the war, who would send their sons into it when the time came, and consider the sacrifice appropriate because every source of information available to them has agreed that it is. The children are not wrong. They have been told true things about some things and false things about other things, and they have no way to know which is which, because the system they live in was designed to prevent them from finding out. The Fire Nation's industrialization carries a specific political argument. The Fire Nation has factories, steam-powered warships, war balloons, metal-clad tanks. No other nation has this level of industrial development. This asymmetry is the material basis for the Fire Nation's military dominance, and it echoes a historical pattern that the show's creators were drawing on consciously. Industrialized nations have repeatedly used their technological advantage to overwhelm technologically less developed societies, and the justification has often been some version of what Fire Lord Sozin says in his flashback about wanting to share the Fire Nation's greatness with the world, the generosity argument for imperialism. The idea that conquest is development and occupation is uplift. Fire Lord Sozin's justification for the war, delivered in a flashback that takes place 100 years before the show's present, is almost word for word the standard colonial justification that has been used by expanding powers throughout recorded history. We are advanced. We are prosperous. We have things that others lack. It would be generous to share these advantages. The sharing happens to require conquering the people who will receive it, but that is a secondary matter. The primary matter is generosity. The show does not explain this historical parallel. It does not draw a diagram connecting the Fire Nation's justification to the real-world colonial arguments it echoes. It just puts the argument in the mouth of the man who used it to start a genocide and lets the 100 years of consequences do the explaining. Jet's freedom fighters represent something the show does with unusual honesty. An examination of what happens to children during wartime that does not end at heroism. Jet is charismatic, resourceful, clearly traumatized, and genuinely committed to fighting the Fire Nation. He is also willing to flood a valley and kill the civilians living in it in order to destroy the Fire Nation soldiers also living there. His moral framework has been so thoroughly shaped by trauma and loss that he can no longer distinguish between defending the innocent and punishing anyone in proximity to the enemy. The show does not make him a villain. It makes him something more complicated and more honest. A child soldier who has adopted the moral logic of the force that traumatized him. He fights the Fire Nation using methods that require the same willingness to sacrifice innocent lives that he condemns the Fire Nation for. He has become, in the process of surviving atrocity, something that the atrocity helped shape. And the show holds this without either excusing it or condemning it, absolutely, because it is not interested in simple moral categories. It is interested in what war actually does to people who survive it. The Southern Water Tribe's devastation is perhaps the show's most quietly devastating political observation. The Fire Nation did not invade the Southern Water Tribe the way it invaded the Earth Kingdom. It raided it. Specifically, repeatedly, systematically, targeting waterbenders for capture or death. Katara is the last waterbender of the Southern Water Tribe because the Fire Nation conducted a deliberate campaign to eliminate waterbending from the South, leaving a people who depended on that ability for their culture and their physical survival without it. The cluster of tents that Team Avatar departs from at the beginning of Book 1 is the remnant of a civilization that was dismantled one raid at a time over generations. The show does not dedicate an episode to explaining this. It is visible in the size of the village, in the absence of people of fighting age, in the fragility of what remains, in the way Katara's grandmother speaks about things that used to be, and the careful weight she gives to memories that have no living context anymore. The destruction is there in every frame of the Southern Water Tribe. You just have to know what you are looking at. Part 10. The ending was always there. The creators of Avatar, The Last Airbender, knew how the show would end before they made the first episode. This bears repeating because it is the structural fact that makes everything else possible. Konietzko and DiMartino pitched the show to Nickelodeon with a complete 3-act story bible. They knew Aang would face Ozai during Sozin's Comet. They knew Zuko's arc. They knew the Order of the White Lotus. They knew the Agni Kai between Zuko and Azula. They knew the image they were building toward. A boy and a girl on a balcony at sunset, the camera pulling back into sky, the war over, the world changed. This structural completeness is what allowed the show to plant seeds in Book 1 that would not flower until Book 3. The lion turtle appears in the library in Book 2, carved on a wall in the Fire Nation bunker later the same season, seemingly incidental background detail, because the people who placed it knew exactly when it would matter. They were building the world with its own future built into it, the way a good architect designs a building that will age well, not despite the decades, but because of them. Zuko was almost redeemed at the end of Book 2. Head writer Aaron Ehas felt that Zuko had not yet done enough internal work to deserve the redemption, that the choice in the crystal caves beneath Ba Sing Se was him choosing the version of himself that was not ready yet, and that the full weight of his redemption required him to live through the consequences of that choice first. Zuko goes back to the Fire Nation. He gets everything he thought he wanted: his father's approval, his nation's recognition, the successful completion of the mission that defined 3 seasons of his life. And it is hollow. It is immediately and obviously hollow. And that hollowness, which he cannot escape or explain away, is what eventually drives him out of his father's palace and toward the Avatar and toward the person he actually is. The finale's approach to Ozai deserves its own examination because it represents the show's deepest engagement with one of the questions it has been building across 3 seasons. Aang cannot kill Ozai. This is not a plot device or a manufactured conflict. It is a genuine expression of who Aang is. His entire culture, the culture that was destroyed, the culture he is the last living expression of, held the sanctity of life as a foundational value. The air nomads were pacifists. Aang is a pacifist. He has bent this in service of the war. He has fought and harmed people, but killing is different. Killing is the line. And the show takes this seriously in a way that most action narratives do not. The solution, energy bending learned from a lion turtle that the show has been quietly establishing since Book 2, allows Aang to remove Ozai's firebending. It is not a convenient deus ex machina. It is a solution that comes from who Aang is, from the specific combination of his spiritual development, his avatar lineage, and his particular ethical commitment. A different avatar would not have had access to this solution because a different avatar would not have refused to kill even when it would have been easier. The solution is earned by the very quality in Aang that made the problem real. Every main character's resolution is specific to them. Katara's arc is a story of becoming that the show tracks through the animation of her waterbending. In the first episodes, her water is small, poorly controlled, clumsy in its movement. By the finale, she bends with a power and precision that makes her one of the most formidable waterbenders alive. The animators tracked this development across all 3 seasons, making her improvement visible in the quality and scale of her bending rather than telling you about it. You can see that she has become what she has become because the water moves differently than it did. Sokka's arc resolves without a single defining moment of obvious triumph, which is exactly right. He spent 3 seasons proving that strategy and humor and love and tactical intelligence are forms of power, and the finale lets him prove it at scale, coordinating the destruction of a fleet of airships without bending, using only the things he has always had. The show trusts this to be enough. It is enough. Toph's resolution comes through the action that only she can take. Metal is not supposed to be bendable. She broke that rule alone, in a cage, under duress, by sensing the earth impurities trapped in refined metal. The finale gives her the opportunity to do this at the largest possible scale, taking on the airship fleet from a position of complete isolation and succeeding because she understands something about metal that no one else ever thought to understand. Her unique ability, born from her unique circumstances, and her specific refusal to accept anyone else's definition of her limitations, saves the world in a way that no one else could have managed. Iroh's resolution is the one that arrives as a wave that has been building since before the show began. He returns to Ba Sing Se, the city he once tried to conquer, at the head of a group of old men whose wisdom the war could not consume. He takes the city back not for the Fire Nation and not even for the Earth Kingdom, but for the world, for the order of people who believe that knowledge and wisdom and the cultivation of good tea can persist even through 100 years of war. And he does it in a way that is unmistakably Iroh's way, with warmth and precision and the particular authority that comes from someone who chose this freely and completely. The final image is Aang and Katara on the balcony of Iroh's tea shop, the Jasmine Dragon, named after a real type of Chinese green tea, Jasmine Dragon Pearl, that is rolled by hand into small spheres and associated with patience and refinement and the appreciation of subtlety. All the things Iroh is. The camera pulls back. It releases you from the story slowly, giving you distance, showing you the balcony and then the building and then the city and then the sky. For 61 episodes, the camera has been close to these characters, inside their fights and their grief and their moments of joy and their long, quiet nights camping in the world. And now it lets go. The sunset is warm oranges and deep purples. Not Fire Nation red, not Water Tribe blue. Something new, something that belongs to a world that is neither what it was before the war nor what it was during it. Something that is becoming itself. The show always knew it was building toward this image. From the moment the story Bible was written, from the moment the three-act structure was designed before the first episode aired, this image was waiting. Every hidden fact, every piece of calligraphy, every tracked moon phase, every Tai Chi movement rendered in ink, every moment of silence that was designed into the structure before the music was ever composed, every camera angle on the unscarred side of a prince's face was placed in service of this. The foundation holds, the world holds, the story holds, the image holds. Rest well. Part 11. The Weight of Attention. There is something worth saying about what happens when you carry this much knowledge about something you love. It does not diminish the love. This is the fear people sometimes have, that knowing how a magic trick works removes the magic, that understanding the mechanism beneath the experience destroys the experience. It does not work that way with Avatar. The more you know about what was built into this show, the more you feel the care that built it. The knowledge does not replace the feeling. It deepens it. When you know that the calligraphy is real, every background scroll carries a different weight. Not because you can read it, but because you know that someone could. Someone thought about what it would say and chose the words and applied the correct style of script for the specific cultural and historical context. The text exists in a tradition thousands of years old. It is not decoration. It is communication. When you know that the lunar cycle was tracked, you watch the moon in the background of nighttime scenes differently. You see it not as a visual detail, but as part of a timeline, a slow change across a season, a cumulative movement toward the full moon at the siege of the North Pole that the show earned through faithful astronomy. When you know that Toph's sleeping position is explained by the physics of her perception, you watch every camping scene with a different layer of awareness. The small detail in the background becomes evidence of a deep understanding of the character, an understanding that went far enough to think through the implications of her ability for her daily life, not just for her fights. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. She meant that genuinely looking at something, giving it the full weight of your awareness, is an act of love. Not the dramatic kind, the kind that announces itself. The quiet kind. The kind that says, I see you, and what I see is worth my time and care. That is what the creators of Avatar did. They paid attention to their world with a generosity so thorough and so consistent that it persisted across 6 years of production and 61 episodes and every detail of every frame. They paid attention to the martial arts. They paid attention to the calligraphy. They paid attention to the way a blind girl sleeps. They paid attention to the philosophy of each element and matched it to a real martial tradition, and found a real human being to choreograph it, and recorded that choreography and sent it to another country to be translated into animation. They paid attention to the lunar cycle. They paid attention to the cultural weight of the number 4. And because they paid attention, the world they built pays attention back. It reveals itself in layers. It gives you something new every time you return. The 6-year-old watching it gets adventure and flying bison, and a blue man with a funny headpiece. The 16-year-old gets philosophy and moral complexity, and a redemption arc that asks questions they are actually living. The 26-year-old gets craft, the martial arts and the music and the architecture and the political precision. The 36-year-old gets all of it at once, and beneath all of it something that has no precise name, the feeling of a world that was loved into existence by the people who made it. That feeling is not accidental. It is not a byproduct of talented people working hard. It is the product. It is the thing the show was designed to make you feel. Every hidden fact is a brick in the architecture of that feeling. And the architecture is so thorough and so carefully built that you do not see the bricks, you just see the world. And the world looks real, because it is real. Not in the sense that flying bison exist or that you can bend water with a Tai Chi form, but real in the sense that it was made by people who cared about it, with the same quality and intensity that you care about it. The love you bring to the show when you watch it is met by the love that is built into it. That meeting is the experience. That is what it feels like to watch something that was made for you. Not made specifically for you as an individual, but made in the spirit that you deserve the best possible version of every frame and every sound and every story beat, and that getting the best possible version is not a luxury but an obligation, and that children especially deserve to be told stories that were made with this kind of care, because children are not less than adults. They are people at the beginning of everything. The show was always smarter than you were, not in a condescending way, in a generous way. It knew you would come back, it knew you would be older, it knew you would see things differently. And it hid enough in its 61 episodes to reward every visit at every age for as long as people keep watching. That is the final hidden fact. Everything else was preparation for it. Someone cared about the calligraphy you cannot read, about the martial art you cannot name, about the moon you did not track, about the sleeping position of a blind girl, about the name of a small lemur eating a peach, about the weight of a boomerang that does not come back, about the color of fire when the person bending it is losing their mind, about the way a scar catches the light when the camera chooses the right side of a boy's face, about the tea. Someone cared about all of it. And the caring is the hidden fact that holds the other hidden facts together, the one that explains why the world feels real and why it lasts and why, on a quiet night when you close your eyes, it is still there, still waiting, still holding everything it was built to hold. Come back whenever you need it. It will be there. If you made it to the end of this, you are exactly the kind of person this video was made for. Drop a like if it found you at the right time. Leave a comment telling me where in the world you are and what hour brought you here. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the moment. Long, slow, careful videos like this one only happen because people choose to stay. Thank you for staying. Sleep well. Script end. Part 12. The names that mean something. Almost every name in Avatar, The Last Airbender, was chosen with intention. Not all of them, and the creators have been candid that some names are more deliberate than others, but the density of meaningful naming in the show is high enough that it functions as another layer of invisible architecture. Aang. In Chinese, the character can mean peaceful, soaring, or ascent, or rise. The Last Airbender, the boy who flies, is named for the act of flight, for the upward motion that defines his element and his nature. He rises. He was in the ice for 100 years and he rose. The world needed him, and he came up out of the deep cold and rose. The name is his nature compressed into a sound, Katara. The name has been connected by fans and researchers to words for droplet or fall of water in multiple languages, though the creators have not always been entirely specific about all their etymological sources. What matters is the feeling of the name, the way it flows when spoken, the slight softness at the center, the open final syllable that does not close. It sounds like water sounds. It sounds like something moving rather than something fixed. Sokka is noted by the show itself to be derived from a word meaning lament. This is a private joke with layers. Sokka is the show's primary source of comedy. He is the group's humor, its lightness, its running commentary on the absurdity of the situations they find themselves in. He is also, beneath all of that, the person who gave up what would have been his normal life to help his sister and later to help the world, who carries the weight of water tribe masculinity and the expectations that went with it, who watches his father go off to war and his sister bend and spends years being the one who cannot bend at all but who still shows up. He laments, quietly, under everything else. The name remembers this even when the character cannot say it. Toph in Chinese can mean to expand or to support. Both meanings apply. She is the one who expands earthbending beyond its previous limits, who invents metal bending, who pushes past every boundary that was set for her by other people's ideas of what a blind girl could do. She is also the one who supports the team when the ground beneath them needs to be literally held together. She is both. The name contains both. Zuko. The Chinese characters in the name that have been most discussed by scholars of the show contain the character for ancestor, the legacy he is trying to escape, the legacy he eventually chooses to define differently, the lineage that both burdens and enables him, are embedded in his name. He carries his ancestors with him whether he wants to or not. Azula derives from the Spanish word azul, meaning blue. Her fire is blue, the color that separates her from every other firebender. The color that makes her dangerous and specific and ultimately signals her unraveling when it destabilizes is in her name. It has always been in her name. Iroh The show has acknowledged that this is a rearrangement of the English word hero, with the letters shifted. The show's great unannounced moral center, the character whose wisdom anchors the entire series, whose love for his nephew and his world and his tea is the gravitational force that everything else orbits around, has a name that is the word for what he is, quietly scrambled, hiding in plain sight. Hero. Iroh. Same letters. The name of the show's primary villain, Ozai, has been analyzed as potentially connecting to the Japanese word for great, or tai, in certain constructions. Though this is fan analysis rather than creator-confirmed etymology, what is more certain is the name of the ancient conflict, the Hundred-Year War, and the figure who started it, Sozin. The name Sozin has been connected by fans to the Japanese word for ancestor. Sozin started a war that lasted 100 years and reshaped the entire world. He is the ancestor of the catastrophe that everyone in the show is living inside of. The Fire Nation's location in the show's world, an archipelago of volcanic islands to the west, mirrors the geography of Japan, which is also a volcanic island chain. The Fire Nation's military aesthetic, its industrial capacity, its imperialist ideology, all draw from the period of Imperial Japan in the early 20th century. The parallel was noted by the creators as intentional, though they were careful not to make it one-to-one, deliberately broadening the cultural synthesis of the Fire Nation's design to avoid making the show seem like a condemnation of Japanese culture, rather than a critique of imperialism, as a pattern that occurs in multiple historical contexts. The White Lotus tile that gives the Order of the White Lotus its name carries a specific philosophical weight. The lotus flower in Buddhism, Hinduism, and classical Chinese philosophy represents spiritual awakening that arises from difficulty. A lotus grows rooted in mud at the bottom of still water and rises to bloom above the surface, clean and uncontaminated by the mud it grew from. The image is of purity achieved not despite suffering, but through it, of enlightenment that is possible precisely because it was earned rather than given. The Order of the White Lotus is a group of wise elders who survived the war, who lost things, who lived in difficult places and difficult times, and who emerged with clarity and purpose. They are named after the symbol of exactly that journey. The name is not decoration. It is the Order's entire philosophical claim in 2 words. Paisho, the game Iroh plays throughout the series, was designed by the production team as a real playable game. The tiles, the board layout, and the basic rules were all conceptualized during development. The White Lotus Gambit, the opening move that Iroh plays and that functions as a recognition signal within the Order of the White Lotus, is a specific named strategy on the board. Fans have since reconstructed the game from visual evidence in the show and created playable versions, which means that a game invented for a children's animated series now exists as a real game that real people play. The fictional became real by being designed with enough specificity that reality could absorb it. The blue spirit mask that Zuko wears in Book 1 is based on a traditional Chinese opera mask. Chinese opera uses color-coded masks in specific ways to denote character type. Blue in traditional Chinese opera represents stealth, cunning, and astuteness, a character who operates in the shadows and achieves their ends through intelligence and misdirection rather than open confrontation. The creators chose blue specifically for this reason. When Zuko disguises himself as the blue spirit, he is not just wearing a mask to hide his face. He is wearing a symbol that describes exactly what he is at that moment in his arc, a person operating in shadow, driven by cunning, not yet ready to be himself in the open. The mask is a character description drawn from a tradition most of the audience would never recognize, embedded in a scene that works on its own terms regardless. Part 13. The Architecture of Character. The show's greatest achievement is not its world building, magnificent as that is. It is its characters. Specifically, the way the characters are built as complete systems, as people who behave consistently because they were understood consistently, not because the writers kept a checklist, but because the people writing them had thought about who they were deeply enough to know what they would do in situations. The show never places them in. This kind of character depth is rare in any medium. In animation aimed at children, it is almost unknown, and it produces a specific effect in the viewer, which is the feeling of recognition rather than surprise. When Aang turns vegetarian in a Fire Nation restaurant and quietly orders around the meat dishes, you do not think, how characteristic of Aang. You think, of course he does. When Sokka produces a plan so detailed and so tactically sophisticated that it almost feels like it belongs in a different show, you do not think, I didn't know Sokka could do that. You think, of course he can. You knew he could? He has always been doing this? You were just laughing at the jokes? The relationship between Zuko and Iroh is the emotional center of the show, and it works because both characters were fully realized as separate people before they were realized as a relationship. Iroh loves Zuko in the way that someone who has lost their own child loves a child who needs love. It is not a simple love. It is complicated by grief and by regret, and by the weight of watching someone he loves make choices he knows are wrong, and having to respect their autonomy to make those choices, because the alternative is more controlling than loving. He guides without compelling. He offers without insisting. He is always there, making tea, being warm, saying things that land differently 2 scenes later than they land when he says them. Zuko's relationship with his uncle is the story of someone learning, very slowly and at great cost, to receive love. He has been taught that love is conditional, that approval is earned through performance, that warmth from powerful figures is either manipulation or weakness. He learned this from his father and his sister, and from the entire apparatus of Fire Nation royalty. And Iroh is offering him something he does not have the language for yet, something unconditional, something that does not require him to be the banished prince finding the Avatar, something that would be there regardless. The moment Zuko turns his uncle into Azula in the Ba Sing Se caves is the show's deepest character heartbreak, and it lands with the force it lands with, because both characters were built to the level where you understand exactly what each of them is doing and why and what it will cost. Zuko chooses his father's approval one last time, and the cost is his uncle, and the cost is real, and the show holds it as real rather than finding a way to soften it. Iroh is imprisoned, and in prison, alone, he does the only thing Iroh can do. He exercises, he meditates, he prepares for whatever comes next. The women of Team Avatar are given the same quality of attention as the men, which is not guaranteed even in shows that are praised for their progressive politics. Katara is consistently written as someone whose enormous competence coexists with genuine emotional need, someone who can defeat master earthbenders and also weep at the loss of her mother's necklace, someone whose strength and her grief are not in tension with each other, but are the same thing expressed at different temperatures. She is the group's emotional glue. She is the one who holds the group together through conviction when other people want to give up. She is also the one who holds a grudge across 3 seasons against the soldier who killed her mother, who carries that unresolved anger as something the show takes seriously rather than resolving neatly, and whose final decision not to kill him is neither a betrayal of her mother's memory nor a capitulation to Aang's pacifism, but a choice she makes for herself. Toph is written as someone whose disability and whose strength are not separate things but the same thing viewed from different angles. She is the most powerful earthbender in the world because she is blind, not despite it. Her seismic sense, which her blindness forced her to develop, gives her a perception of the earth that no sighted earthbender could replicate. The thing she was told would make her helpless is the source of her specific and irreplaceable power. The show never draws this conclusion explicitly. It just shows you who Toph is across 3 seasons and trusts you to understand it. Azula is the show's most complex antagonist and one of the most complex characters in American animation. She is not the villain. She is someone who was placed in a poisonous system at a young age, who was extraordinarily gifted and extraordinarily rewarded for that gift, whose gifts were celebrated in ways that taught her that love is conditional and that the condition is perfection. She has no access to warmth that is not earned. She cannot imagine care that does not require something in return. She does not understand what Iroh offers Zuko because Iroh's kind of love is, in her experience of the world, simply not a thing that exists. Her breakdown in the finale is not a comeuppance, it is a tragedy. She was given everything except the things that would have helped her, and when the things she was given started to fail, she had nothing else to reach for. The blue fire going orange and then chaotic is not the defeat of a villain. It is the disintegration of a person who never had a chance at being anything other than what she became, and who is now discovering that what she became is not enough to hold the world together when the world stops cooperating. The show treats this with the respect that tragedy requires. It does not celebrate her breakdown. It watches it with the camera pulled back, the music minimal, the mood elegiac rather than triumphant. Two siblings who were made into what they are by the same father are destroying each other in a rain of blue and orange fire, and the show understands that this is not a victory. It is what happens when a system built on power and performance, and conditional love, finally produces its full consequence. Part 14. The Long Consequence. Avatar. The Last Airbender premiered on the 21st of February 2005 in a Saturday afternoon time slot on Nickelodeon between SpongeBob SquarePants and The Fairly Odd Parents. It was marketed to children between the ages of 6 and 11. It aired for 3 seasons, concluding on the 19th of July 2008. By almost any standard applied to television at the time, it was a successful children's animated series. By the standard it set for itself, it was something more specific and more difficult to categorize. It was the show that proved American animation could sustain serialized, long-form storytelling with the depth and emotional complexity associated with the best dramatic serials in any medium. Before Avatar, American animated television was overwhelmingly episodic. The format was designed for audiences who could drop in at any episode and follow the story without prior context. Series-long narrative arcs were rare. Character development that carried weight and consequence from season to season was almost non-existent. The standard was a reset button between episodes, a return to a comfortable stasis, an implicit agreement with the audience that nothing they watched would change the characters or the world in ways that required them to watch everything to understand anything. Avatar discarded this agreement entirely. If you watch the finale without having watched the series, it would not make sense. Not because it was obscure or deliberately challenging, but because it was the conclusion of a 3-year story in which every episode built on every episode before it, in which the characters' present behavior was the result of their entire history, in which the ending was earned precisely by everything that preceded it. The show bet on its audience being willing to commit to a story rather than to individual episodes, and it won that bet. And the winning of it changed what American animation was allowed to be. Steven Universe, Gravity Falls, The Owl House, Adventure Time in its later seasons, She-Ra, and The Princesses of Power. All of these are descendants of the permission that Avatar established. They are shows that trust their audiences to commit, that use serialized storytelling to build emotional weight across seasons, that treat character development as something that compounds rather than resets. None of them would look exactly the way they look without the precedent that Avatar established. The show did not just tell a great story. It expanded the territory of what great stories in this medium were allowed to be. The children who watched Avatar in 2005 are now adults in their late 20s and 30s. Many of them have watched the show multiple times at different ages, finding different things each time, accumulating a relationship with it that is not static but grows as they grow. The show was built to accommodate this. The 6-year-old version and the 30-year-old version of the same person will watch the same show and have genuinely different but equally valid experiences of it because the show was built with enough depth to hold both. The 6-year-old gets Appa and Momo and the air scooter and the jokes about cabbages. The 16-year-old gets Zuko's redemption arc and the politics of Ba Sing Se and the weight of Iroh's grief. The 26-year-old gets the martial arts and the calligraphy and the production philosophy and the deliberate cultural research behind every design choice. The 36-year-old gets all of this simultaneously and also something beneath it, something about what it means to care about a thing so much that you cannot make it any way other than the best way you know how to make it. The show has never been more popular than it is now. Its arrival on Netflix in 2020 during the early months of the pandemic introduced it to millions of people who had either never seen it or had grown up with it and needed it again in a difficult time. It topped Netflix viewership charts. It accumulated new fans across every age group. Children today are discovering it for the first time and having the same experience that children in 2005 had, the experience of a world that feels real and a story that feels true, and characters who feel like people they know or people they want to become. 20 years after its creation, more than 15 years after its finale, the world is still there, still holding, still hiding things in its margins, still rewarding attention with discovery, still doing what it has always done, which is to be more than it appears, to be richer than it needs to be, in every frame and every note and every carefully brushed character of classical Chinese calligraphy, a gift. The hidden facts are not trivia. They are not the kind of information you bring out to impress people at parties. They are the architecture of an experience, They are the reason the experience is the experience it is. And knowing them does not diminish the experience. It expands it. It shows you the full scale of what was built and why, and the showing deepens the gratitude rather than dissolving the wonder. Someone chose every detail. Someone earned every emotional note. Someone tracked the moon and hired the calligrapher and found the martial arts consultant and thought carefully about the sleeping position of a blind girl and put a meaning into every name and planted seeds in book 1 for flowers that would bloom in book 3. That is the last and the deepest hidden fact, the one that contains all the others. All the care was real. All of it, real. Good night.